So thank you for having me present again. I was asked to present on the Enslaved description group. Our group formed last fall, and our first meeting was January the 14th of this year. These are the members of our group. And as you can see, our group brings a lot of experience working with enslaved projects and enslaved description. This is kind of an outline of what I'm going to cover. A little bit of looking back to the beginnings, and then formulating name entries, the conceptual category types that we worked on, and then editorial rules for controlled vocabulary. And I'll go into that a little more in a second. First, I wanted to look back just for a moment. Last year when I spoke, I talked about conducting African-American research and the difficulties with that. Databases are inconsistent. There's often dispersed information that causes a loss of connections to associated facts. It's enslaved person research and genealogy is more complex than non-enslaved person research and genealogy. Often it's difficult to organize this information. Research is indirect through various owners, records, locations, occupations, etc. Because it's complex, it's hard to keep the information in focus and straight. And enslaved person researchers may not know where to look. And also, this research doesn't fit the norms for non-enslaved person research. And I said then that new tools were needed. And I did bring up an idea that I had that I call slavery code. Also, going back to last year, I talked about how we hit a brick wall. Often we will see first names and listed constantly. And it's hard, it's like a fog that you don't know where to look, which name might lead to the information that you need. And that non-enslaved persons that have a last name is really a benefit. So I wanted to just cover, since I spoke about it, just quickly what I mean by slavery code. It's a shorthand data that stays with a specific name entry from a specific record. And I think that it provides specificity, visibility, and portability. And I asked, how can we connect archival records, the content, without having this information for us to link persons, for instance, in SNAC? We need this basic information. I won't belabor it. Okay. So I also showed last year that this is our goal. The Enslaved Description Group wants to open windows in that brick wall and provide all of this description, connect archival databases, and be able to describe individuals. In December of last year, Daniel kind of gave us our marching orders. He said the starting point and focus at first was to formulate name entries for the enslaved that will facilitate research. devise and relate this to full descriptions of the enslaved and to descriptions of entities, things related to the enslaved. He went on to say that describing related entities will be essential because knowing the enslaved largely through the records of those that are enslaved, who enslaved them. Name entries will necessarily employ elements that are directly based on the names of related entities, records that provide the evidence of enslaved identity and life, and that current forms of doing this, RDA and Unimark, are not sufficient for sufficiently recording this information. So let's go to the first thing that we looked at. Also in February, Daniel was thinking out loud, which I will quote a little bit here. He based this on the slavery code idea that I had put forward. If the enslaved person has a sparse name that consists of a single name component, or perhaps two when the found reference to the enslaved is an epithet, then the record which the reference is found does not represent documentation of a transfer of custody, then the name entry would be put forth in that manner. So you would have a surname, forename, a name addition, owner, location, record type, record date. And then if there was a transfer of custody, then you would be able to repeat the owner and the location. What I picked up on in Daniel's wording here was the use of the word epithet, which I think this Merriam-Webster definition helps capture what I was getting at when I said a descriptive term about this individual. So this says a characterizing, and I put in descriptive, word or phrase accompanying or occurring in the place of the name of a person or thing. And Daniel said also that in August that perhaps there will be another conceptual category called event type that will help define this better. He had some questions after, well, I had a statement here also that we need to recognize that sometimes the occupation, relationship, that's wife, husband, child, work partnership, etc., physical characteristic, etc., can form the necessary distinguishing factor for the individual. And that's where I think that an epithet could be the way that that can come forward also. Daniel's question here was, would we relate a person to an occupation term and then also put the term in the name? And if so, why? And I said, yes, giving the example of Blacksmith Lewis or Lewis, Blacksmith Lewis as a term, that's a characteristic that may define that individual if the information is sparse. Another question, why would we include the name of the wife, husband, child, work partner in the name when we can easily display the relationship as we do in relationships? Has descendant, has ancestor, has child, has parent, etc. And I pulled this document from one of Thomas Jefferson's papers where he has two people named Sook, but one is the mother of Philip Athens and one is the child of Siller. And those are the only defining pieces of information that we have there. And so I consider that a name addition or an epithet that is necessary. Next, I'm going to go on. We've spent quite a bit of time, our group, on conceptual category types. These three, and especially occupation, we spent a considerable amount of time on, but I'm going to go through each of them a little bit. I wanted first to pull an example from SNAC, and here I pulled Frederick Douglass, and with a quote from Daniel saying, first is that there is SNAC as it is right now, and then there's SNAC in the future. And as you can see in the yellow, that those conceptual category types are all, well, mainly plural. And this is changing, I believe, Daniel, is that right? To singular terms. So it would be occupation. Activities used to be function. That has already changed to activities, and I think it's changing to activity. But I wanted also to look at this information about Frederick Douglass a little bit. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into slavery on the eastern shore of Maryland in 1818. He barely knew his mother, who lived on a different plantation and died when he was a young child, never discovered the identity of his father. When he turned 8 years old, his slave owner hired him out to work as a body servant in Baltimore. At an early age, Frederick realized there was a connection between literacy and freedom. Not allowed to attend school, he taught himself to read and write in the streets of Baltimore. And I asked, what is missing there? And also under relationships, I did look through it. Most of this is associated with, but let's look at the next slide. And I'm saying here, with new conceptual category types, we need to revisit biographies and include enslavement description. This is some information that I found on the History Channel's history.com website. It includes who owned them, the names of the families, the people. It includes the plantation name, the location. It includes type work he did as an enslaved person, and some transactions. So at the bottom there, you'll see that I tried to mock up a little bit of the changes that are proposed. As I told you, the terms are changing to non-plural terms. Also some additions. I have here slavery era demographics and ethnic group, and those are proposed. But you can see that the relationship owned by, the place where he was enslaved, some other subjects such as atrocities to mention, occupations, he was a domestic servant, he was a field hand. And then as you can see, the other terms that were filled in a little bit more. So we went into occupations quite a bit for slavery era entities. One of the first decisions we made as a group was that instead of using slave trade entities, we decided to use slavery era, because this is going to be inclusive of enslaved, free, freed, and other terms. Plus, it's going to go from antebellum, postbellum, and colonial, whatever, it'll cover a broader range than slave trade. Daniel requested that, he stated that the vocabulary management module is being developed, and that it will help to manage these conceptual category type, subject, occupation, activity terms. And he gave us some starting features that we needed to look at: preferred terms, alternate terms, related terms, scope note. So all of these terms, all of the conceptual category types will be managed in one table. And so we started there. This is just a sample from the spreadsheet that we began, and then a sample of an authority record. What I wanted you to take away from also here is that although we listed preferred terms, we do realize at some point that these terms will have to be reviewed and decisions made about what is preferred and whatnot. But let's go to the next. This is a little more detailed view of the spreadsheet. We use domains to help us organize the terms. And here I have, just to show you, that we have agricultural domain and crop production subdomain underneath that. But the role of domains is undetermined at this point for SNAC, and it may not be used. But I wanted you to just know about that if it does come up at a later point. Also, we have over 400 occupation terms that are related to the slavery era that were included in this spreadsheet. And this is just give you a glance at all of the occupation domains that we used. And I was just showing you where agriculture and crop production fit into that list. Next, we have spent a little bit of time, we're just getting into it more so on slavery era demographic groups. So going back to February, Daniel, thinking aloud again, demographic terms lists for enslaved and related entities that can be displayed next to the name, even perhaps strategically inserted into the name string for display. To develop an enslaved demographic term vocabulary, use the system described above, maintain terms for both enslaved and enslavers. Want to use it in conjunction with, for instance, occupation terms, so a person can be both enslaved and a carpenter. And then in this other example, more than one enslaved term can be associated with the same CPF qualified by a date range. So a person may be enslaved at one date range and then free at another date range. And so I also, up at the top, we started with it being slavery era entity type, then later it was enslaved demographic term vocabulary. And recently, I think Daniel has termed this the slavery era demographic group. So this is one of the new proposed conceptual category types. Next, I just wanted you to see a little bit of our spreadsheet here so that you could see that this includes the more common demographic groups, well, slavery era demographic groups of enslaved, freed, or emancipated, free, and that's freed, repeated, and indentured servant, bond servant. But it also includes some that you perhaps don't think of in this category, and these are CPF terms. So we have chain gangs, and we have chain gang captives. We have coffle person, we have coffle. And at the bottom of that first section, we've had a little bit of a discussion recently about given on time enslaved person, a person that's sort of in between free and enslaved, but has that term associated. So we still have a lot of work to do, but just to give you an idea. Also, just letting you know a little bit of the scope of these terms, in particular with subject, occupation, activity, slavery era demographic groups. Those may be used with CPF description, except for occupation is specifically just for person. So letting you know that. And that we have, I've told you about some of the new and proposed conceptual category types, and that more additions may be added as they are approved or considered for by the editorial standards and policies work group. And also more than one concept can be, any given concept may have more than one category type. Let's see if that's going for it. It's coming just a second. This slide takes a while to load. There. Okay. So I just wanted to show with this slide some of the progress that we're making on enslaved description by showing the SNAC category types and what they address. As you can see at the bottom there, the slavery era demographic group would cover the term that's in the red, enslaved or free person. We've also worked with occupation and ethnic group, which is a proposed category type. But all of these concept category types help to define this individual and help us to pull together archival records. I wanted to also give you another way to look at it, perhaps a way that I might look at it, to say, how does our work address slavery code concepts? And giving you the example of Jack here, that if we look at that he was a boy, then well, that is one of the epithets. That is the descriptive. So he's a young child at that point, but I wanted to give an example of if it included his ethnic group of being mulatto, or if it included occupation, then blacksmith would apply, might be an example of that. You can see that he's enslaved. That's a slavery era demographic group. You can see relationships. He was owned by James Mavis, and in 1774, he was sold to John Archer. You can see the place where he was enslaved first, and then with the transfer of ownership, he ended up in Guilford County. And then you can see the event type, a bill of sale. Next, I wanted to go on to ethnic group, which is a proposed category that we've also just begun to look at. And here you can see some listings of ethnic group types. And we understand that some of these may need historical use notes in order to explain its sensitive inclusion. We also understand that the use of quotation marks in text may be a way of adding snippets that from original sources. The final thing that our group has done is that we've looked at editorial rules for controlled vocabularies, and a subgroup was formed from that, which Daniel just told you about, Laura Hart, Stacy Lavender, and myself, looking at rules for formulation of terms and ethical considerations in the selection of terms. Daniel had begun us on this path back in February also, I think, but he instructed our subgroup to draft controlled vocabulary for editorial rules for occupation terms. And again, saying that SNAC of the future, and just showing you a little bit of the one in development to the right. This, I think, has already changed. But the vocabulary management module in SNAC will give the opportunity to manage subject, occupation, activity, terms, etc. In formulating the editorial rules, we went to ANSI-NISO guidelines, and they were saying the need for vocabulary control arises from two basic features of natural language. Two or more words or terms can be used to represent a single concept, for instance, a synonym. Two or more words can have the same spelling and represent different concepts, therefore a need for qualifiers. And they also say there are three principal methods for control: definitions and scope notes, relationship terms, and broad, narrow, related, and qualifiers. We kind of had a breakthrough on this in May, when Jerry gave us a sample authority record that we could use as a template of what we needed to do. And so we used this. It later changed a little bit, but I wanted you to see the final focus for the editorial rules became the preferred term, the used for term, which we use the term variant term as the preferred term in SNAC instead of non-preferred or alternate term. Also broad term, narrow term, related term. And then we have a scope note, which is a definition and clarification. And we added a historical use note, which gives the historical context, specific explanations and sensitivities, a place for that to be addressed. And again, we don't know if domains will be part of this. When we were doing these initial editorial rules, we noticed that although we were focusing on occupations, that what we were really looking at was broader than occupations. So these, we could see that it didn't just fit for occupations for the editorial rules. um, modern versus older terms, gender neutral terms, the need for humanizing terms, where you use plurals, capitalization, qualifiers, and so forth. We also looked at ethical considerations in the selection of terms. Maximum inclusion terms were to be sought. Here we went, what we looked at as our gender specific term editorial rules is use gender neutral term for preferred term if term currently exists. Use older gender specific term if term is currently used. For instance, a foreman, a cowboy. Use older gender specific term if an equivalent gender neutral format does not exist. Use older gender specific term with a qualifier if the term does not currently exist. So that's just what we had proposed. Also trying to use humanizing terminology, field worker versus field hand. Also, this one specific to occupation or worker status. An occupation term must consider the state of employment, paid work versus non-paid work. So a domestic worker is preferred in that case over a domestic employee. And finally, we laid out what we thought were recommendations for modern versus historical terminology and a preference for modern terminology. This is what the final editorial rules look like. And the next, as I said, we thought that it didn't just apply to occupations. So what we have drafted here is something that may possibly apply to SNAC. And the next step is for it to go to the Standards and Editorial Policy Group for review to see what they think. This is the last slide. I met Ibrahimo Kuruma in Raleigh on the 28th of August, and something that he said resonated, and I just wanted you to hear it.
So my name is Ibrahimo, and originally from Guinea, West Africa. So I'm Mandingo. So if you have read, the book from Alex Haley, The Roots, so you basically understood my heritage, right? So, but my name also, because I'm Kuruma actually was my ancestor. Fakoli Kuruma used to be, a great warrior in the Manding kingdoms. And so that's my heritage. So, we are known to be the fierce, leaders and warriors. So that goes with our name. So wherever we go, that follow us. It doesn't matter if you are a lady or a small boy, you get that respect because of that ancestry.
And I do say, except if this legacy is not documented, not recorded, not discoverable, not taught, and not respected. And this is our challenge. And I ask all of you, please take up this challenge. Thank you.